I'm 65 years old, and last Tuesday I read my granddaughter a bedtime story for the first time in my life. You need to understand what that means. Not the sweet part, not the part that looks like a greeting card. I mean what it cost to get there, what I gave up, what I pretended, what I lost quietly every single day for 6 decades, just so nobody would know. I couldn't read, not a word, not a menu, not a road sign, not the name of the street I'd lived on for 30 years. I looked at letters and they were just shapes, patterns that meant nothing to me. And I hid that from everyone, my boss, my kids, my wife, everyone. The hiding, that's the part I want to talk to you about today. Because I think some of you are hiding something too. Maybe not reading, maybe it's something else entirely. But that sick, cold weight in your chest when you know there's a gap between who you are and who people think you are. I know that weight. I carried it until it nearly broke me. My name isn't important. What I did for a living isn't important. What matters is that I was good at something, genuinely good. And I built a whole life around being good at that one thing. And I arranged every single day of my existence so that nobody ever had to find out what I couldn't do. I grew up in rural Kentucky. My father worked tobacco. We moved a lot, 6 schools before I was 12. And somewhere in those moves, something got skipped. The building blocks, the phonics, whatever it is they teach you first. I fell through a crack, and nobody caught me. And by the time I was 9 years old, I was too ashamed to ask for help, because everyone around me was reading, and I didn't understand why I couldn't. So I learned to survive on listening. I was a good listener. Still am. You can learn almost everything you need to know just by listening carefully to the people around you. You memorize logos instead of words. You recognize the shape of your street by the gas station on the corner, not the sign. You order at a restaurant by what you heard the person before you order, or you say, "What do you recommend?" and let them choose. You watch what other people do before you do anything yourself. You become incredibly good at pretending. My friend Ray, we worked together for 11 years at a manufacturing plant outside Louisville. Ray figured it out once, just once. We were filling out some forms together and I stalled. And he looked at me in this way, this quiet, careful way, and he said, "You want me to just read that part out loud?" And I said yes. And he did. And neither of us ever mentioned it again. That's the kindness I remember most from that time in my life. Not the people who helped me loudly. Just Ray, reading a form out loud like it was nothing. My wife, Carol, God, she passed 3 years ago. And I still reach for the phone to call her. Carol knew. She knew for 30 years, and she never once said it directly. She just quietly handled things. She'd read the mail and summarize it at dinner. She'd go over the medication bottles before I took anything. She'd fill out the forms at the doctor's office and hand them to me already done and just say, "Sign here." We built a whole private language around it, a whole system. And I think now about how much energy she spent, how much she protected me, how much I never thanked her for. She died before I learned to read. That's the thing I can't undo. That's the one that gets me at 3 in the morning, the medication bottles. I want to stop there for a second because I know some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You pick up a prescription and the label has 12 lines of tiny text and you're squinting at it and guessing. There are 36 million adults in this country with low literacy levels, 1 in 6. And the leading cause of preventable hospitalizations in older adults, I'm talking people our age, is medication errors. Taking the wrong dose, taking something at the wrong time, missing a warning about what not to combine it with. I did this. I guessed. I watched Carol for cues on when she took her medication, and I matched my schedule to hers. For years. I got lucky. A lot of people don't. But here's the thing about shame. Shame doesn't just cost you the thing you're ashamed of. It costs you everything around it. It shrinks your life. You stop applying for certain jobs because the application process involves too much reading. You don't go to certain places. You avoid certain conversations. You develop an elaborate internal map of safe and unsafe situations. And slowly, gradually, your world gets smaller and smaller. And you tell yourself it's fine. You tell yourself you prefer it quiet. You tell yourself you're just getting older, and that's what happens. I was 64 years old, standing in a public library in Cincinnati, holding a children's book, and I was terrified. My granddaughter Emma, she was 4 at the time, she'd handed me a book about a caterpillar. You know the one. Everyone knows the one. And she'd climbed up into my lap and said, "Read it, Grandpa," and looked up at me with those eyes that don't know yet that anything is impossible. And I froze. I said I'd left my glasses in the car. I always had an excuse. I always had a reason. But that night after Carol's daughter, my daughter-in-law Karen, after she came in and read it instead, I sat in my truck in the driveway for an hour, and I thought about what I was passing down, what I was teaching Emma about asking for help, about what grown men do with things they can't do. I was teaching her to hide. I found the program through the public library, Pro-Literacy. They have a locator. You can find it. It's a real organization. It's free. And I called the number and I hung up twice before I let it ring through. The woman who answered was named Denise. She had a voice like she'd heard everything and nothing surprised her, and she wasn't going to make it weird. She said, "Come in on Thursday at 10. I said, "Okay." I didn't go for 3 weeks. When I finally went, there was a man in the waiting room. His name was David. He was 58, retired from the post office, and he told me he'd sorted mail for 31 years without ever being able to read the addresses. He'd learned to recognize the visual patterns of zip codes, of names, without ever reading the actual letters. He sat there on a folding chair with his big hands on his knees, and he said, "I figured if I could learn that, I can learn the real thing." He wasn't ashamed. He was just matter of fact. I'd never seen that before. Someone just saying it plain. David and I went through the program at the same time. Phonics, at 64 and 58 years old. Sounding out letters like children. There's something in your brain. They call it neuroplasticity. But what it really means is that your brain never stops being able to learn. It never closes. It stays open until the end. And what that means practically is that when I sat in that room and started connecting sounds to shapes for the first time, something started moving. Slowly. Painfully slowly. But moving. Can you still learn after 60? That's what you're probably asking. That's what I asked Denise. She looked at me and she said, "I have a student who's 81 and she's reading recipe books right now." That shut me up. And here's what I want to say to you. Not just about reading, but about whatever your version of this is. Because I know your version might not be literacy. Your version might be technology. I talk to people our age all the time. People who are perfectly intelligent. Perfectly capable, who go cold inside when someone asks them to download an app, or log into a patient portal, or do their banking online. People who hand their phone to their kids like they handed me that children's book and said, "Just handle it." People who've built the same elaborate avoidance systems I built, just in a different room of their life. The shame feels identical. The shrinking feels identical. The world getting smaller and smaller and calling it preference, that's identical, and the cost is the same. Because here's what I know now. The gap between what you can do and what you let yourself try is where your life disappears. That's not a motivational poster line, that's just what happens. You do the math on decades. 7 months after I started the program, I read a full chapter book by myself. It took me 2 weeks, and I used my finger on every single line. And I didn't understand every word, but I read it. And I sat with it for a long time afterward, not celebrating exactly, just sitting with it, thinking about the man who'd been ashamed for 55 years, thinking about Ray at the plant, quietly reading a form out loud, thinking about Carol filling out medical forms and handing them back and saying, "Sign here." And I thought about all the things I didn't do, all the years I spent energy on hiding that I could have spent on something else. The job I didn't apply for in 1989 because the interview required written testing. My son's school papers I signed without reading. The letter from my own mother, in her last years, that I held and nodded at and never actually read, and never admitted I hadn't read. You can't get those back. I want you to sit with that because I think we pretend we can. We tell ourselves we'll do it later, when we're ready, when the time is right, when we're less busy, when things calm down. I said that for 55 years. But here's the other side of it, and I need you to hear this too. Last Tuesday, I read Emma a bedtime story. She's 5 now. She sat in her pajamas with her stuffed rabbit, and she leaned against me, and we read about a caterpillar together. That same book. And she traced the pictures with one finger, and I followed the words with mine. And neither of us were rushing. And she didn't know what that moment cost, and she didn't need to know. That's available to you. That moment, whatever your version of it is still available to you. If you think your brain is too old, it isn't. If you think it's too late to go back to school, it isn't. There are free adult education programs in almost every county in this country. You can find them through the National Literacy Directory or your local library, and they are full of people our age walking through that door for the first time. If you think the shame means you shouldn't have started, that's backwards. The shame just means you cared and you were scared. That's human. That's not permanent. You are not the gap. You are not the thing you can't do yet. I'm 65 years old. I have more years behind me than in front of me, and I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter. But the years in front of me, I'm reading them now, every single one. If something in this reached you, if you've been carrying something like what I carried, I want you to leave it in the comments. You don't have to tell me what it is, just say you heard me. And if you think someone else needs to hear this today, a parent, a grandparent, a friend who you suspect is hiding something, share it with them. Just put it in front of them and let them decide. Sometimes that's all it takes. Someone putting the thing in front of you without making it weird. Like Ray reading a form out loud. Subscribe if you want more of this. I've got a lot more years of stories to tell, and I finally learned how to write them down.